Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea that's shaking up how we think about language, especially in our schools. It's called translanguaging, and you'll see it totally challenges some of the oldest assumptions we have about what it even means to be bilingual. So let's just kick things off with this question. Are bilingual people just two separate monolingual people living inside one brain? I mean, for a long, long time, the answer in education was basically, yeah. The whole goal was to keep languages separate, neat and tidy. But what if that entire idea is just wrong? Okay, let's break this down because it's a huge shift. The old way of thinking saw languages as these walled-off boxes in your brain. You had your English box, your Spanish box, and moving between them was called code switching. But this new idea, translanguaging, says, nope, that's not how it works at all. Instead of separate boxes, you have one big integrated linguistic system. You draw on everything you know, all at once. So, what is translanguaging really? It's way more than just mixing languages. It's a completely different way of seeing how language actually works for people who are multilingual. So here's the formal academic definition. The part to really focus on is full linguistic repertoire. See, it's all about what speakers naturally do to create meaning. It's about ignoring those artificial borders that we've drawn around languages like English or Mandarin. Here's a great way to think about it. A bilingual person isn't like a musician who can only play a jazz song or a classical song. No, they're like a musician who can pull from jazz and classical and rock all at the same time to create something totally new and expressive. They're using their entire toolkit. Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like for real teachers and students? Where the rubber meets the road, in a real classroom. Let's dive in. First up, let's meet Nadia. She's studying to become a teacher, and in one of her university courses, her instructors told the students something wild. They could submit their writing in any language they wanted. For Nadia, this was a completely new concept. And her reaction just says it all. She asked, "You mean I can write my language and switch back and forth?" Think about that. For so many bilingual speakers, this is a total revelation. They've spent their entire lives in school being told to keep their languages in separate lanes. Nadia was finally, maybe for the first time, given permission to be her whole self. And this really gets to the heart of why this is so important. Nadia started weaving Punjabi words into her English writing. She explained that some words, like dosts for friends or apne for her own people, just carried way more passion and a deeper feeling than the English words. It wasn't because she didn't know the word in English, it was about choosing the word with the absolute richest meaning. Now let's look at another story, Evelyn's. For her, it wasn't just about finding that one perfect word. Translanguaging was a tool she could use for deeper thinking. She just found it was way easier and more powerful to actually form her ideas in Mandarin first. So what did she do? She started writing her assignments for class in Mandarin, where her thoughts could just flow freely without getting jammed up in translation. In her personal writing, she even went back and replaced English spellings of Mandarin words with the actual Chinese characters, because she wanted to preserve what she called the beauty of the words. And check this out. To help her audience understand, she added drawings. That's a perfect example of using all your resources, right? Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. You might be thinking, all right, this is great for people who speak multiple languages, but it's not just for them. Let me introduce you to Peter, who's also studying to be a teacher and considers himself a monolingual English speaker. This idea of using his full linguistic repertoire really made Peter think. He realized that even just within English, he was kind of policing himself. So to express some raw emotion in his own writing, he started using curse words, sort of pushing back on that stuffy academic English. But more importantly, he took this whole philosophy into his own fourth grade classroom. He told his students they could use any language they wanted. And what happened? One of his students wrote her entire piece about Christmas, La Navidad, completely in Spanish. So the big question is, what really happens when we let students learn this way? The stories are incredible, but the research points to some very clear, very consistent benefits. Research from pioneers in this field, Ophelia Garcia and Joanne Kleifkin, points to 4 major positive outcomes. First, students get a much deeper understanding of what they're reading. Second, they create richer, more diverse work. Third, they develop what's called confianza. It's a Spanish word for a deep kind of confidence in themselves. And finally, it helps them develop a critical awareness of how language actually works in the world. And look, this isn't just a handful of nice stories. A 2022 review that looked at 47 different studies found that these strategies are being used and they are working. A massive 91% of the studies showed that it led to students writing for real audiences and creating much more genuine work. Over half involved collaborative learning, and more than a third saw students making cool multimodal projects, just like Evelyn did with our drawings. And all of this leads us to the biggest idea of all, translanguaging. It's not just a better way to teach, it's actually a step toward a much more just and fair education system for everyone. The brilliant writer Gloria Anzaldúa talked about this idea of an in-between space. She said this is where real transformation happens, in a space that doesn't have clear boundaries. And that's exactly what a translanguaging classroom is. It's a space where students can exist between languages, between cultures, and create something totally new. And that's why this is so huge. This is so much more than a teaching strategy. It's a political stance. It pushes back hard on the idea that one language or one way of using language is better than another. It honors the full, complex identity of every student and tells them that everything they are, everything they bring with them, is valuable. So we'll just leave you with this one final thought to chew on. The evidence is pretty clear that for multilingual people, languages aren't these separate, walled-off things in the brain. They are one dynamic, living, integrated resource. So that leads to a pretty big question. If our languages aren't separate, why on earth are our classrooms?